I am Elena, 34 years old this year. My mother, a woman strong and loving me boundlessly, passed away at the age of 55. And Nick, the man I once called my stepfather, is now 65 years old. My mother and Nick jointly owned the house they had lived in together for 16-17 years. All assets were considered joint property, divided 50-50ths. I had moved out on my own at 18, trying to be independent and not wanting to interfere too much in my mother's private life. Though at times I sensed things were not right with Nick. When I was 27, wanting a better future, I decided to go back to university. My mother and Nick at that time agreed to let my small family, my husband and young daughter, rent the basement apartment in their house. I thought it would be a new beginning, a solid foundation for me to study in peace. But life doesn't always go as planned. Just a year and a half after I started my program, devastating news struck my family. My mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. Everything happened too fast. Just a week before the scheduled surgery to remove the tumors, one of the largest tumors ruptured. Complication followed complication. The malignant cancer cells had metastasized. My mother received a new diagnosis, a rarer type of cancer that develops in connective tissues. The doctors gave a grim prognosis. Mom had only about 2 more years if she didn't receive aggressive treatment. It was precisely at this time, when my mother was at her lowest and most in need of care and love, that Nick began to reveal his cruel nature. I will never forget that fateful doctor's appointment. Nick was also present. When the doctor explained the treatment plan for my mother, Nick suddenly flew into a rage right there in the clinic. He roared, "My wife isn't going to do a damn thing," then stormed out. My mother, trembling and desperate, told the doctor that day. These words were carefully recorded in her medical file. "I fear for my life. I know if I don't get treatment, I will die. But I also know Nick will never allow me to do so." It wasn't just fear, it was a silent cry for help. And that was the moment I knew I had to do something. My mother's battle, and mine, truly began from that moment. Ever since that fateful doctor's appointment, Nick completely transformed into a different person. Or perhaps, that was his true nature my mother had endured for so long. He began to abuse my mother systematically, from harsh words, psychological control tactics, to even crude physical contact. The pain from her illness seemed to multiply manifold in the face of the cruelty of the husband she had shared her life with. Nick callously drained the money from their joint bank account, leaving my mother without a penny to buy even the most basic necessities. Even a loaf of bread became a luxury. Not stopping there, he also tried every way to prevent my mother from accessing medical treatment. The height of his cruelty was when Nick cut the brake lines on my mother's car. An act not only inhumane but also potentially lethal. If my mother had chemotherapy scheduled twice a week, she could only manage to go to half of those sessions, and only when my husband and I could arrange the time to take her. Each trip to the hospital was a struggle against time, against Nick's obstruction, and against my mother's own fear. Seeing the situation worsen day by day, I couldn't let my mother continue to live in that toxic environment. Mom moved down to live with my family in the basement apartment. Our presence somewhat brought her a little peace and safety, but it also meant I had to confront Nick more directly. I told him straight, my voice trying to remain calm but firm. "If you don't stop these actions immediately, I will do everything in my power to ensure you are held fully responsible if anything bad happens to my mother." In response to my warning, Nick just sneered contemptuously. "You're just a woman, what can you do to me?" That statement was like a knife twisting deep into my helplessness at the time. But simultaneously, it ignited a flame of determination. Nick's abuse didn't stop with my mother. It began to extend to me whenever he had the chance. I knew I couldn't fight barehanded. I immediately hired a good lawyer to protect my mother's rights. At the same time, a bold but necessary decision was made. I changed my major to criminal law. I had to understand how the legal system worked, to equip myself with the knowledge to confront Nick systematically and legally. For 8 long months, I silently gathered evidence of Nick's abusive behavior. I installed security cameras in strategic locations in the house, and Nick was fully aware of their existence in certain areas. I made no secret of it. Every video, every word, every action of Nick's was carefully recorded. Besides, my mother's medical notes, especially her statement to the doctor about her fear of Nick, also became important evidence. During this time, realizing that the prolonged stressful situation would not be good for my mother's health, I tried to find a more amicable solution. I had been pre-approved by the bank for a loan to buy out Nick's 50% share of the house, amounting to $250,000. All Nick needed to do was sign a consent form, and within 30 days, he would have the money. But Nick flatly refused. He growled, and those words were also recorded by the camera. "I won't let you have this house. I'll kick all of you out onto the street." Nick's stubbornness and cruelty extinguished all hope for a peaceful resolution. A legal battle was inevitable. After many months of gathering evidence and meticulously preparing the case file, my mother's lawyer's office officially served Nick with a summons to appear in court to resolve issues related to abuse and asset division. However, with his arrogant nature, Nick refused to cooperate. He declared that he knew more than all the lawyers and would never appear in court. It was this arrogance and contempt for the law that became Nick's fatal mistake. Because Nick deliberately absented himself from court hearings, the advantage completely shifted to my mother's side. The court, after reviewing all the evidence we provided, issued a final judgment. My mother was granted full ownership and use of the house. All assets registered in Nick's name were frozen and placed under my mother's supervision to prevent any illegal disposal or liquidation. At the same time, the court also issued an order prohibiting Nick from approaching my mother and the house within a certain distance. And most importantly, Nick was not allowed to leave Canadian territory until everything was resolved satisfactorily. On the very night the judgment was issued, the police came and evicted Nick from the house. The door locks were immediately changed. It was a night when, for the first time after so many months living in fear and insecurity, my mother and my entire family could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Nick's dark shadow had been temporarily pushed back. With Nick no longer in the house and causing obstruction, we quickly enrolled my mother in the ODSP Ontario Disability Support Program, a government program that helps people in difficult medical circumstances. Thanks to that, my mother could finally begin her treatment regimens more safely and regularly. She received transportation assistance from ODSP and cancer support associations, something Nick had always tried to prevent before. Another extremely important legal step was also taken. My mother's lawyer helped her change the form of homeownership from joint tenants joint ownership with right of survivorship to tenants in common joint ownership by shares. For those unfamiliar, joint tenants usually applies to married couples, where upon one person's death, the property automatically belongs to the survivor. Meanwhile, tenants in common allows each individual to own a distinct share of the property and have the right to dispose of that share in their will. When my mother was still lucid, she made a will, clearly stating that her entire share of the house and other assets would be left to me. This was a strategic move to ensure that what belonged to my mother would not fall into Nick's hands, no matter what happened. For the next 2 years, while my mother bravely fought her illness, the legal battle with Nick did not stop. He continuously refused to cooperate, wouldn't sign divorce papers, and ignored all settlement offers from our side. Throughout that time, I became my mother's primary caregiver, worrying about her every meal, her sleep, every pill. Those were incredibly difficult months, witnessing the person I loved most weaken day by day due to illness, while still having to brace myself to deal with Nick's schemes and stubbornness. Near the end of my mother's life, during a final conciliation meeting at court that Nick was forced to attend, he brazenly declared in front of my lawyer and the honorable judge, "I refuse to sign any papers or resolve anything further. I will not attend any more meetings either. I will wait until she dies, then I will take back everything." Both the judge and the 2 lawyers present that day sternly warned Nick that this would never happen, that the law would not tolerate his dark intentions. But Nick just sneered defiantly. That was also the last time we saw Nick or heard from him directly. That year, my mother did not survive. But she did not pass away directly from the cancer, which had been somewhat controlled, but from a cruel complication of the disease itself. A remaining tumor unexpectedly ruptured, causing massive upper gastrointestinal bleeding. My mother took her last breath in my arms. In that moment, time seemed to stop. The pain tore my heart apart. I had done everything I could, but still couldn't keep my mother with me. That traumatic and haunting event left a deep psychological scar on me. I was later diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Nevertheless, amidst immense pain and chaos, I still had to pull myself together to arrange everything for my mother. Meanwhile, Nick had disappeared without a trace. He changed all his contact information and did not update his status with the court, despite summonses and requests. After my mother's funeral, her lawyer carried out the necessary procedures to probate and execute the will in accordance with the law. Because my mother had previously been granted full ownership of the house by the court, and according to the clear content of the will along with video evidence of my mother's consent, while she was lucid, which the lawyer and judge had carefully established beforehand, all of my mother's assets, including the house, were transferred to me. I only needed to sign a few legal documents with the judges to confirm my agreement with what my mother and the law had arranged. All procedures were conducted legally, transparently, and correctly. I also requested and received all of my mother's medical records, which included the important notes from the first doctor who witnessed Nick's rage and recorded my mother's account of her fear of Nick preventing her treatment. These documents were irrefutable proof of Nick's abuse. However, a harsh reality was that both my lawyer and the judges believed that, although they fully agreed that Nick's actions had directly contributed to my mother's decline and death, holding him criminally responsible was extremely difficult under current law. Nevertheless, I am not giving up. To this day, I am still pursuing the case, trying every way to force Nick to bear criminal responsibility for what he did. My lawyer says the chances are only about 60-40, very slim. But she is still trying her best. Based on the evidence and even indirect admissions we obtained from Nick during the previous proceedings, the house, which holds so many memories of me and my mother, along with everything my mother owned, now officially belongs to me. I also received my mother's life insurance payout, and I used the entire amount to pay off my mother's outstanding debts, including joint debts with Nick such as lines of credit and credit cards. Everything Nick had smugly thought he would seize by waiting for my mother to die has now been legally recognized as mine, with the judge's approval. Although Nick caused so much suffering, I still try to act fairly and humanely. I agreed with the court that I would honor the buyout agreement for Nick's 50% share of the house, an agreement that was proposed when this legal battle first began. However, any debt Nick owes me, as he still has 50% equity on paper, but in reality owes me a lot, will be deducted directly from that buyout amount. Currently, the debt Nick owes me has reached over $50,000, and this figure continues to rise, including costs for repairs and renovations to the house that I am solely paying for, payments for the joint mortgage, and also repayments for their joint line of credit. We also agreed with the court not to reappraise the house's value at this time, because of the major repair costs I am currently bearing. My lawyer wants to go even further, requesting Nick to bear 50% of all legal fees we incurred over time, and also 50% of the material and emotional damages I suffered due to the PTSD caused by all these events. But the biggest problem is, first, we need to find out where Nick is. Because Nick has disappeared and no one can contact him, the 2-year statute of limitations in our Canadian province for civil claims to remain valid in court is also nearing its end. The lawsuit Nick had previously filed to reclaim ownership of the house was officially dismissed by the court on the grounds that he had abandoned claim and title. I was present for the court hearing that decided this matter. Nick, of course, was not. A short time later, with the help of a tech-savvy friend, we found a lead on Nick's whereabouts. That cruel stepfather had fled to Mexico. completely ignoring the court order prohibiting him from leaving Canada, which was issued when he was evicted from the house. Nick's violation of the court order is another legal issue, and my lawyer is handling that part, as it no longer directly relates to my ownership of the house. Until Nick returns or is arrested and extradited if possible, the court in Canada is not overly concerned about his remaining civil matters here. My lawyer and the judge also advised me on possible scenarios. In the event Nick never returns to Canada, or suppose he passes away in Mexico, we will initiate legal proceedings to sue his estate, if any, in court, requesting that the 50% equity in the house that still belongs to him on paper be transferred to me as a form of collateral to offset the huge debt he owes me. Regardless, in every legal aspect, I am still the lawful and sole owner of the house, with full possession and usage rights. If Nick ever returns to Canada, he will certainly face serious legal consequences for violating the court's travel ban. And more importantly, he will not be able to reopen the lawsuit to claim the house that was previously dismissed by the court. My lawyer affirms that once a claim has been determined by the court as abandoned, Nick has no right to reopen a similar case. Therefore, Nick will only have two options: either accept the offer to buy out his 50% share after deducting all the debts he owes me, or do nothing.